In the last week of April 1945, American soldiers found a freight car sealed from the outside. Not guarded, not moving, just sitting alone on a forgotten siding in central Germany, with a rusted chain across the door. And from inside that car they heard scratching, not knocking, scratching. The sound of people too weak to make a fist. When the chain snapped and the door finally opened, the soldiers saw German women packed in the darkness like abandoned cargo. 74 of them had been loaded inside. 4 were already dead. The rest lifted their hands toward the light, not because they were surrendering, but because they believed the Americans had come to shoot them. That was what their own officers had told them. If the Americans find you, they will kill you. No trial, no mercy, no exception. But when the door opened, no rifles fired, no orders came. No revenge arrived. Instead, a sergeant from Ohio uncapped his canteen, knelt in the filth, and held water to the lips of the first woman he could reach. And in that moment, everything those women had been taught about the enemy began to collapse. This is not a story about how war ends when armies surrender. It is a story about what happens when a lie dies in the hands of the person it was supposed to make you hate. April 18, 1945. A military rail platform somewhere west of Fulda. The Reich was no longer an army. It was a ruin pretending it still had orders. Telephone lines were dead. Command posts had vanished. Officers were burning papers, changing uniforms, and slipping away before sunrise. But fear was still disciplined. Fear still knew how to stand in formation. 74 German women stood beside a freight car under a cold gray sky. Most were communications auxiliaries, clerks, telephone operators, medical helpers, not frontline soldiers, not commanders. Women who had spent the war carrying messages, copying reports, patching wounds, and doing exactly what the state told them to do. Among them was Martha Rice, 23 years old, a radio clerk from Bremen. She had one small suitcase, a tin comb, and a photograph of her mother folded inside a prayer book she no longer knew how to use. Beside her stood Lot Kern, a nurse from Erfurt, 29, thin from years of rationing, with hands that still tried to steady other people even when her own were shaking. And at the back of the line was Anneliese Brandt, barely 21, a switchboard operator who had joined because everyone in her district had joined something. The officer in charge told them they were being moved east, away from the Americans. 2 days, he said. Maybe 3, there would be water at the next stop. Food after that. Then his voice lowered. If the Americans catch you, they will shoot you on sight. You serve Germany. They will not care that you are women, no one argued. By April of 1945, argument felt like a luxury from another century. The women climbed into the boxcar. It had been built for crates, grain sacks, maybe machine parts, not people. There were no seats, no toilet, no lamps, only 2 narrow vents near the roof, so high that even the tallest woman could barely reach them. The doors slid shut, the chain dragged across the outside. Then the lock clicked, and the world became wood, metal, breath, and darkness. At first they tried to behave like soldiers. Lot made them divide the floor, half sit, half stand, switch every hour, keep the aisle clear, do not panic. Marta counted them by touch, moving her hand from shoulder to shoulder in the dark. 74. A number large enough to feel impossible, but small enough that every cough had a face. The train moved before sunset. For a few hours the rhythm of wheels gave them something like hope. Metal clacked beneath them. Someone whispered that they were going to Bavaria. Someone else said Bohemia. Someone else said there was no east anymore. Then the train stopped. No one opened the door. It sat for 6 hours, maybe 8. Time had no shape in the dark. By the next morning, the air was sour. The small canteens were empty. One woman had a crust of black bread wrapped in cloth. She broke it into pieces so small they vanished on the tongue. By the second day, thirst became bigger than fear. Lips split. Tongues swelled. Women stopped talking because speech wasted moisture. The corner they used for waste became unbearable, but there was nowhere else. The officers had promised supplies at the first stop. There was no first stop. There was only movement, stillness, movement again, and no human voice outside the walls. By day 4, the car was no longer a transport. It was a sealed room where bodies learned how little they needed before they began shutting down. Anneliese fainted near the door. Lottie crawled to her and slapped her cheeks until she opened her eyes. "Stay with us," Lottie whispered. But she was not sure what she was asking her to stay for. Marta kept a diary by touch. The writing wandered across the page because she could not see the lines. Day 4, she scratched into the paper. "No water since yesterday morning. The car smells like sickness. I heard someone praying. But I do not know which God would listen from inside a locked freight car." Outside, Germany was collapsing so quickly that the car simply disappeared from responsibility. The officer who sealed it was gone. The train crew vanished. The yardmaster had fled. Paperwork burned in a stove somewhere, and 74 women became nobody's assignment. By day 6, the first body stopped moving. Her name was Clara Metz. She had been 42, older than most, a hospital orderly with swollen ankles and a photograph of 2 sons sewn into her coat lining. The women could not lay her flat. There was no room. They shifted her into the far corner and turned their faces away. No prayer could make the air cleaner. No dignity could survive the dark. By day 8, another woman died. By day 9, 2 more. The living no longer cried when it happened. They had no water left to spend on grief. Annalise sat against the door and scratched at the boards with her broken nails. Not loudly, not strongly, just enough to prove that some part of her had not surrendered. She scratched until her fingers bled. She scratched when she forgot why she was scratching. She scratched because waiting to die felt worse than pain. On the 11th morning, or what they believed was morning, the train moved one last time, only a short distance. Then it stopped with a jolt, the engine uncoupled, the vibrations faded, and for the first time in days there was complete silence outside. No wheels, no shouts, no artillery, no orders, just wind. Marta wrote one final line in her diary. If anyone opens this door, we will not know whether to thank them or fear them. April 29, 1945, Sergeant Raymond Calder walked into the abandoned rail yard with 7 men and a list of things his unit needed. Fuel, tools, medical crates, anything the Germans had left behind and the Americans could still use. Calder was 31 from Toledo, Ohio. Before the war, he had worked nights loading steel coils onto river barges. He had landed in France. He had crossed Germany. He had seen enough bodies to understand that war did not end cleanly. But the rail yard was supposed to be empty. Just broken windows, burned papers, loose rails, a few dead locomotives cooling in the spring air. Private Ben Mallory heard it first. He stopped near a row of freight cars and turned his head. "Sarge." Calder kept walking. Mallory said it again, quieter this time. "Sarge, listen." They stood still. At first, Calder thought it was a rat inside the car. Then the scratching came again. Slow, weak, human. The smell reached them before they touched the door. Calder had smelled death before. But this was death mixed with breath, death that had not finished its work. He raised a hand and the squad spread out. The boxcar was chained shut from the outside. A German transport seal still hung beside the lock. Corporal Elias Novak, whose parents had come from Prague and who understood enough German to be useful, pressed his ear near the gap. He pulled back fast. "There are people in there. Get cutters," Calder said now. The first chain resisted. The second snapped so hard it whipped against the door. 3 soldiers pulled the door sideways. For 1 second it refused to move. Then it screamed open. Sunlight struck the inside of the car, and the men stepped back as if the darkness itself had hit them. Women were everywhere, on the floor, against the walls, folded over each other, some unmoving, some blinking, some raising thin arms against the light. Their uniforms were gray-green, filthy, torn, stiff with sweat and waste. Their faces looked carved down to bone. Calder saw 4 bodies in the corner that did not react to light at all. Then he saw a young woman near the door staring at him with huge sunken eyes. Annalise Brandt. She tried to lift both hands. Not in greeting, not in surrender, in protection. She was waiting for the bullet. Calder took 1 step into the car and lowered his rifle until the barrel pointed at the floor. "Easy," he said. "Nobody is shooting." Novak translated, his voice shaking. "No one will shoot." Annalise did not believe him. She could not. Her mind had 1 instruction left inside it, and that instruction said Americans kill prisoners. Calder unscrewed his canteen. He did not hand it to her. Her hands were shaking too badly. He knelt in the filth and lifted it to her mouth himself. Water touched her lips. Her eyes changed first, not relief, not gratitude, shock, as if the world had broken its own rules. She drank too fast, choked, coughed, and Calder pulled the canteen back. "Slow," he said. "Slow." Then he shouted over his shoulder, "Medics, we need medics here, all of them." Within minutes, the forgotten siding became a rescue station. Soldiers who had come looking for supplies ran for stretchers. Blankets appeared. Canteens were passed forward. A truck reversed across the gravel with its tailgate open. The Americans had planned for an inventory sweep. They found a prison made by neglect. One by one, the women were carried into the open air. Some screamed when soldiers touched them. Some whispered that they had children. Some begged not to be shot. Some could not speak at all. Marta Rice was lifted out near noon. Her diary was tucked inside her coat, damp and bent. When Novak asked how long they had been inside, she opened cracked lips and made a number with her fingers. 11. Then she forced out a second word, days. Calder looked back at the car. 11 days. No food, almost no water, 4 dead inside, and a government that had frightened them more effectively than it had protected them. Mallory stood beside him, pale. What are they, Sarge? Calder watched a medic wrap an army blanket around Annalise's shoulders. Yesterday, he said, they were the enemy. Today, they're patients. The aid station was a schoolhouse with shattered windows, patched with canvas and blackout cloth. The classrooms had become wards. The hallway smelled of iodine, diesel exhaust, boiled linen, and coffee. Captain Ruth Merrick, an army nurse from Pennsylvania, met the first stretcher at the door. She had treated men with missing limbs. She had held morphine syringes between her teeth while shells landed close enough to shake dust from the ceiling. But the woman on the stretcher looked less wounded than erased. Annalise weighed almost nothing. Her hands had curled inward. Her fingernails were split and dark. Her pulse came and went under Merrick's fingers like a candle in wind. Start saline, Merrick said. Slow, not too much. Her body will fight us if we rush it. The needle went in. Annalise flinched and tried to pull away. Merrick caught her wrist gently. No, help. She pointed to the bottle. Help. Novak, standing nearby, translated as best he could. Medicine. Water. You are safe. Annalise stared at him. Safe was a word from a different language, even in German. Over the next 6 hours, 70 living women were processed through the schoolhouse ward. Every chart said the same thing in different degrees. Severe dehydration, starvation, exposure, infection risk, organ strain, shock. The doctors expected to lose more before morning. Major Alan Breck, the senior medical officer, gathered the staff at midnight. How many? A surgeon rubbed his face. Maybe 8, maybe 12. Some are too far gone. Breck looked toward the ward, where American nurses were moving bed to bed, holding spoons of broth to the mouths of women who had been told those same hands would kill them. Then he said, "No, we don't decide they're too far gone while they're still breathing. Get more cots. Move the supply tent. Wake the quartermaster. If we have glucose, they get glucose. If we have blankets, they get blankets. If we have to tear doors off classrooms to make more bed frames, tear them off. We opened that car. Now we fight for what came out of it." By dawn, the schoolhouse had doubled its ward space. By the second day, the women had clean sheets. By the third, the ones who could swallow were fed broth, then porridge, then tiny pieces of bread softened in milk. The Americans had to ration kindness carefully, because even kindness could kill a starving body if given too quickly. That was the cruelest part. After 11 days of abandonment, rescue had to come by teaspoon. Marta woke on the 4th morning with a blanket up to her chin and a nurse sitting beside her. Captain Merrick held a cup of broth. "Small sip," she said. Marta understood only the gesture. She drank. Warmth spread down her throat, into her chest, into the empty place where hunger had become normal. She looked at the nurse and whispered, "Why?" Merrick did not need translation. Every rescued woman had asked the same question with her eyes. Why feed us? Why treat us? Why not hate us the way we were taught to hate you? Merrick set the cup down and took Marta's hand. "Because you are alive," she said. "That is enough." Marta did not understand the words, but she understood the hand, and that was worse. Cruelty would have confirmed everything. Kindness had no place to fit. A week later, 3 more women had died. The 4 from the boxcar were buried first, then the 3 from the ward. 7 wooden crosses. 7 names when names could be found. The American chaplain read a short prayer. German women stood behind the burial line in borrowed coats, unable to understand why enemies would stop to honor the dead of a defeated nation. Lotte Kern, the nurse, watched the burial without blinking. She had spent 11 days inside the boxcar trying to keep others alive with nothing but orders, pressure, and a voice she refused to let break. Now Americans were burying the women she had failed to save, not dumping them, not hiding them, burying them, with markers, with records, with care. That night she told Marta, "I do not know what to do with this." Marta asked, "With what?" Lotte looked across the ward, where a young American private was changing the dressing on a German woman's infected hand. "With the fact that they are better to us than our own people were." No one answered, because the truth had entered the room, and it had nowhere polite to sit. Recovery was not beautiful. It smelled of disinfectant and fear. It sounded like coughing, nightmares, bedpans, whispered apologies, and the scrape of spoons against tin cups. The women gained strength by ounces. A few steps across the room became a victory. Standing long enough to wash was a victory. Sleeping without waking up, clawing at invisible boards was a victory. Then came the bathhouse. The Americans had converted an old municipal washroom near the school. Steam rose from working pipes. Soap sat in stacks on a bench. White towels hung from a line. For the nurses, it was sanitation. For the women, it was another test they did not understand. Annalisa froze at the entrance. Showers, tiles, steam, a closed room. By then everyone in Germany had heard rumors. Some believed them, some refused to. But the word shower no longer belonged only to water. She pulled back so hard that her knees almost gave. "No," she whispered. "Please." Captain Merrick saw the terror and understood enough. She removed her helmet, then her jacket. Then, still in uniform shirt and boots, she stepped under the running water first. Steam soaked her hair. She held out her hand. "Just water," she said in broken German. "Only water." Annalise stared at her. The enemy was standing fully clothed under a shower to prove it would not kill her. That was the moment Annalise began to cry. Not a neat tear, not a single cinematic drop. She folded at the waist and sobbed so violently that Lottie had to hold her upright. When the water finally touched her skin, it carried 11 days of filth down the drain. It also carried away something harder to name. The last certainty that fear had given her. Marta wrote that night. "The soap broke me, not the boxcar, not the hunger, the soap." Because cruelty is easy to understand after war, mercy is not. By mid-May, the women had been moved to a displaced persons camp built from a former teacher's college. The rooms were plain but clean. The beds were real. The blankets did not smell like death. They were given civilian dresses, patched shoes, ration cards, and work that would help restore their sense of being useful. Kitchen duty, laundry, filing supply requests, assisting in the infirmary. 3 meals a day arrived with such regularity that some of the women hid bread under their mattresses for weeks. They could not trust abundance. They had been trained by scarcity too long. One morning, Marta sat before a plate of potatoes, bread, and a spoonful of jam. She stared at it until the food went cold. A clerk named Greet beside her muttered, "This is performance." Marta asked what she meant. "They are showing us to look noble. It is politics." Marta looked toward the kitchen doorway, where an American cook was quietly setting aside extra broth for 2 women still too weak to eat solids. "Politics does not wash your hair," Marta said. Great had no answer. That was what made the camp unbearable. The women could argue with speeches. They could resist lectures. They could dismiss newspapers as propaganda, but it was harder to dismiss bread. Harder to dismiss a nurse changing a bandage. Harder to dismiss an enemy soldier walking slower because the woman beside him could not keep up. Mercy kept becoming physical, and because it was physical, it kept becoming undeniable. Lotta began helping in the infirmary. Her training returned before her confidence did. She sorted bandages, checked temperatures, translated pain when she could. One afternoon, Private Mallory cut his palm while opening a crate of medical tins. Lot reached for gauze before anyone told her to. Mallory looked surprised. "You don't have to do that." Novak translated. Lot wrapped the hand tight but not too tight. "You are bleeding," she said, "so I help." Mallory smiled a little. "Guess that makes sense. It should have been nothing. A small cut, a strip of gauze." But Lottie thought about it all night. Because only weeks earlier, the world had told them that enemies were categories. Not faces, not hands. Not people who bled red onto a bandage and said thank you awkwardly in a language they did not share. The hardest part of the camp was not recovery. It was comparison. The women were forced to compare what they had been told with what they had been given. They had been told Americans were savages. The Americans had saved their lives. They had been told Germany would protect them. Germany had locked them in a car and lost the key. They had been told obedience was honor. Obedience had delivered them into darkness. One evening, Marta opened her diary and wrote, "I am ashamed of how safe I feel here. That sentence frightens me more than hunger did. Because if I am safe with the enemy, then what was I serving before?" June 1945. 5 weeks after Germany's surrender, the camp command posted a notice. All German personnel were to report to the assembly hall after supper. Attendance required. No one explained why. The hall had been cleared of desks. Chairs faced a white sheet stretched against the wall. A projector stood at the back. The women entered quietly. Some joked because fear needed somewhere to hide. Some sat with arms crossed. Some stared at the covered windows. Colonel Matthew Arlen stood at the front with an interpreter. His voice was tired, not angry. "You are going to see film taken by Allied troops inside camps liberated this spring," he said. "I am not showing this to humiliate you. I am showing it because the country you served built its power on what it could make people refuse to see." The projector clicked. The first images were blurry. Gates, barbed wire, barracks, then bodies, piles of bodies. Men and women alive but reduced to skeletons. Faces that looked too empty to belong to the living. Shoes stacked in mountains. Children's clothing, ovens, mass graves. The names came through the interpreter. Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen. Marta covered her mouth. Lotta stood up, then sat down again because her legs would not hold. Annalise made a sound so small that no one looked at her, because every person in the room was trying not to make the same sound. Some ran out, some turned their faces away, some whispered no no no, as if denial could push images back into the projector. But the film kept going. 20 minutes. 25. Long enough for disbelief to exhaust itself. When the lights returned, no one moved. Then crying began in one row, then another. Soon the room was full of women weeping, not because they had all been executioners, but because they were beginning to understand what ordinary service can help carry when ordinary people stop asking where the machine is going. Colonel Arlen waited. Then he spoke again. Most of you did not build those camps. Most of you did not pull triggers. Most of you were clerks, nurses, operators. But you lived inside a system that required millions of people to look away. He paused. The reason we fed you is not because we forgot what Germany did. The reason we treated you is not because guilt disappeared. It is because we refuse to let hatred decide who receives mercy. That is one line this war cannot be allowed to erase. Then he left them with the film still hot in the projector. That night no one slept. Gret, who had called the food performance, sat on her bed with her face in both hands. Lottie walked the hallway until dawn. Annalise opened and closed her fists as if feeling for the freight car door. Marta wrote until her pencil broke. I understand now why mercy hurt so much. It was not weakness, it was accusation. Every cup of water said you were lied to. Every blanket said you were lied to. Every bandage said you were lied to. They did not need to beat us to defeat what we believed. They only had to treat us like human beings. August came hot and dusty. The repatriation lists were posted. 67 women from the freight car were still alive. Their bodies had rounded slightly. Their cheeks had color. Their uniforms were gone. But the boxcar had not left them. Some still slept with a hand near their throat. Some panicked at the sound of sliding doors. Some saved crusts of bread in coat pockets even on full stomachs. The Americans arranged buses to carry them toward the occupation zones where they could search for families, homes, or whatever remained of either. The night before departure, the camp held a small gathering in the dining hall. Coffee, plain cake, a phonograph that scratched more than it sang. No speeches at first, just awkward gratitude moving around the room in fragments. Marta found Sergeant Calder near the doorway. He looked uncomfortable in clean sleeves, as if rescue had embarrassed him more than combat ever had. She spoke in careful English. You opened the door. Calder shook his head. A lot of people did. No, Marta said. You opened it first. He did not know what to say. She reached into her coat and pulled out the prayer book. Inside it was the photograph of her mother and several diary pages pressed flat. I thought you would kill us, she said. I know. Why did you not hate us? Calder looked toward the hall, where Lottie was laughing softly at something Private Mallory had failed to pronounce in German. Then he said, I did hate plenty by then, but hate is not a set of orders. Marta repeated the line under her breath, trying to keep it. Hate is not a set of orders. The next morning, the buses waited in the yard. 67 women climbed aboard carrying paper bags, Red Cross parcels, and memories too heavy for luggage. Annalise sat by the window. When the engine started, she flinched. Then she made herself look out. The Americans stood in a loose line, waving. Not triumphantly, not theatrically. Just human beings saying goodbye to other human beings who had arrived as enemies and were leaving as witnesses. Lotta raised her hand. Marta did too. As the bus pulled away, Annalisa pressed her palm to the glass. For a moment she imagined the freight car door again. The chain. The darkness. The hands raised against the light. Then she saw the sergeant kneeling with a canteen, and the memory changed shape, not healed, not erased, changed. The women returned to a Germany of rubble, hunger, suspicion, and silence. Some families refused to believe them. Some neighbors said the Americans must have been using them. Some people did not want stories that made defeat complicated. But the women told the story anyway, not always in public, not always loudly, sometimes only to a daughter at a kitchen table, sometimes in a letter. Sometimes to a student who asked what the war had taught them. Marta kept the diary until old age. On the last page, written years after the camp, she added one sentence. The door opened once in a rail yard, and I have spent the rest of my life trying not to close it again. Lot continued nursing. She treated Germans, Americans, Poles, Russians, anyone brought through the ward. When a younger nurse once asked how she could be so calm with people who had been enemies, Lottie said only, pain has no uniform. Annalise became a school clerk. Every spring when trains passed behind the town, she would pause until the sound faded. Then she would continue her work. She never called the Americans saints. She never made the story simple. Mercy did not erase the war. It did not excuse Germany. It did not bring back the dead in the corner of the car, but it did something victory alone could not do. It broke the lie at the place where the lie had been strongest. The officers had said the enemy would kill them. The enemy brought water. The officers had said mercy was weakness. The enemy used mercy like a blade, cutting through fear, pride, propaganda, and every excuse that had kept hatred alive. 74 women entered that freight car believing they knew who the monsters were. 67 came home carrying a truth their ruined country did not know how to receive. Sometimes the strongest weapon in war is not the gun that forces surrender. It is the hand that gives water to someone who was taught to fear it. The war ended on paper in May. For them it ended the moment the enemy opened the door.